All right, Ryan, what's on your radar?
So on June 10th, 2019, The Intercept published an investigation that exposed a secret Washington lobbying operation being run by the United Arab Emirates, deploying Donald Trump's good friend Tom Barrack as its agent. Barrack, himself a real estate billionaire who was a frequent guest on CNBC, has often been described as Trump's only real friend. And he was floated as a potential chief of staff, but decided to stay on the outside instead. On June 20th, 10 days later, FBI interrogators sat down with Barrack and questioned him about his relationship with Rashid al-Malik. Now, Malik had already been a subject of the Mueller probe, and one of the things people forget about that investigation is that it didn't just look at Russian involvement in the election. It looked at foreign influence operations more broadly, and it zeroed in on Gulf states like the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The Intercept had found that al-Malik was a paid agent for the UAE and was in regular contact with Barrack, one of the most influential people in Trump's orbit. A year earlier, the New York Times' David Kirkpatrick had revealed the extent of the contact between Barrack and UAE Ambassador Yusuf al-Otaiba. That report was based on emails either hacked or stolen from Otaiba's inbox, and the source doled them out to various media outlets, including The Intercept, and there's good reason to believe, though it can't be proven, that UAE rival Qatar played a role in that. So just remember that anytime somebody says the media shouldn't report on hacked or stolen documents. If the information in the documents is legit and is something the public should know, it doesn't matter where it came from. So that same year, ProPublica published a memo from Barrack's company, Colony Capital, from Trump's early days, in which the plan to profit off of Barrack's good luck, to be caught between his good friend the president on one hand and some of the richest people in the world on the other. The New York Times later reported that the UAE and Saudi Arabia invested nearly $2 billion in his company over those years. According to the indictment, this was happening while Barrack was acting as an unregistered foreign agent for the Emiratis. You can't do that. One of the charges is that he lied to FBI investigators in that June 20th, 2019 interrogation. But now is where it gets really interesting. It's not every day that the Department of Justice handcuffs a powerful billionaire and fights to keep him jailed, arguing he's a flight risk. There are now two questions for Barrack with enormous implications. What, if anything, does he know about Gulf state bribery of anybody in the Trump family? And would he rather share that information or fight his charges? Barrack, before Trump was elected, helped broker a potential deal between the richest man in Qatar, the former Prime Minister Hamad bin Jassim Al Thani, known as HBJ, and Jared Kushner. This was to bail out Kushner's failing property at 666 Fifth Avenue, an investment so ridiculous it threatened Kushner's entire business. Those talks continued after the administration took office, but HBJ eventually backed away. It was not only a bad investment. Giving that much money to the president's son-in-law was surely to raise eyebrows. In April 2017, as we also reported in The Intercept, Kushner's father met with the Qatari foreign minister and hit him up directly for a bailout of 666 Fifth Avenue. Meanwhile, Barrack was bringing the UAE and Saudi Arabia, Qatar's rivals, closer to Trump, and we know from the indictment he helped set up Trump's first foreign trip to Saudi Arabia. Kushner and his wife Ivanka Trump met privately and off-record with Mohammed bin Salman while they were there. Less than 2 weeks after Trump left the region, and not long after Qatar pulled out of the deal with Kushner's company, Saudi Arabia and the UAE declared a blockade on Qatar. An extra hostile act given that Qatar is home to a base with some 10,000 American troops. They even made plans to invade the country. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson quickly rushed to calm nerves and call for an end to the blockade. But Kushner intervened at the behest of the UAE, and instead, Trump attacked Qatar as a state sponsor of terrorism. A Qatari source told us at the time they wished in hindsight they'd given Kushner the money. Quote, "It would have been much cheaper," he said correctly. This might all sound complicated, but here's the simple version. Kushner's company desperately needed money. They repeatedly hit up Qatar. They were repeatedly turned down, and Kushner greenlit a blockade of the country. And Tom Barrack was right in the middle of it. In September, Barrack told his UAE handler, according to the indictment, that the White House was planning a summit of the three countries to resolve the crisis. UAE leaders then relayed back to Barack that such a meeting was not in their interests, and Barack reached out to the White House asking to speak directly to the president. The talks were scuttled, and the blockade remained in place until Trump lost re-election. And Rachel, that's just the start of it. We haven't even gotten to Kushner's trip to Saudi that happened right before MBS's roundup of all those royals in the Ritz. And we haven't even gotten to the butchering of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, which happened not long after that. Do you have a sense of whether or not this is a scandal that the D.C. media is going to be interested in? Because it was happening in plain sight all along, yet all Washington wanted to talk about the entire time was Russia, Russia, Russia.
Right.
Even though I was hopeful at the time that the reporting would get picked up because the magic word of Mueller was in there. Like, Mueller was uncovering a bunch of these foreign entanglements. But if it wasn't Russia, nobody seemed to care. It was like as if these Gulf states could get away with whatever they want because they weren't just caught up in this one narrative that D.C. cared about.
Well, this, I think, is the question at hand, because what you're describing is explosive. I mean, this is massive layers of corruption, if everything in here is true, and hopefully Tom Barack will shed some light on, whether it is or not. But to your point, whether or not this will be covered, this sort of is an indictment of D.C. itself, because I suspect if it doesn't get covered, it's because the rot goes so deep. Because what we're talking about here is not just sort of influence peddling writ large, it is specifically using our foreign policy for personal financial outcomes. And I suspect that this goes beyond just the Kushner and Trump family and into sort of the corridors of power around this city. And so that's why I think the reporting you guys do is so important, because it does shed a light on these things that may not get covered elsewhere.
And my guess, I'm curious for your take, I don't think Barack is going to talk. And I think what we just talked about with Khashoggi is one of the reasons why. So the charges right now are white collar crime. It's not registering as a foreign agent. It's lying to the FBI. Those are essentially the charges. The rule is that if you're doing work on behalf of a foreign government, you're allowed to do that, but you have to tell the Department of Justice. You have to register with them so that they know who's trying to manipulate our government. He didn't register. We're talking, maximum, if you stacked everything, it could be a long sentence, but typically you're looking at a year or two. He's an old man, he's in his 70s, but you do a year or two in federal prison, and then once you're out, you have your life back, and you still have your money. If you flip, you have now turned on people who have shown that they're willing to send a hit squad to Canada to go after a Saudi dissident there, that they're willing to lure a Khashoggi into a Turkish consulate and dismember him. So, if you're Barack, you're like, maybe I'll just take the year or two here. But I wonder in Washington how many people read this indictment and were like, wait a minute, I've done that.
Right.
Like I had dinner with Ambassador Oteba. He asked me for some questions. He asked me some questions about what the administration's up to. He asked for a favor or two. I did that favor. Was I supposed to register? Do you think that that's one reason we won't hear a lot about it?
I do in some respect, because to your point, if you work in the city long enough and you work in politics, you are bound to come across foreign agents. Like, they're all here officially, right? You're bound to come across them. When I worked in Congress, I would have meetings, with different secretaries from the embassies. That's just how business is done. And it's very difficult, I think, to distinguish between people who are here, representing the interests of their country and people who are here for a more insidious purpose. And I'm wondering what you think if, there's a lot of talk if FARA, that you mentioned, the law, the Foreign Agent Registration Act, needs to be updated to account for the kinds of influence that we're seeing. I've talked a lot about this before, where, foreign countries will donate to American think tanks who then put out policy that may or may not be supporting those countries. That's not really disclosed in a lot of cases. So, do our laws even account for, how this business is done? Right.
We shouldn't have to rely on, a leak to The Intercept or the New York Times to find out, which foreign government is funding which think tank. That should be disclosed. And certainly if people are testifying before Congress, they should be disclosing not just the think tank that they work for, but who funds the think tank. And if their work is earmarked to that particular subject, that would be a good thing to know.
Yeah. And I would be remiss, obviously, if I didn't mention, I do think that a lot of this was this uncomfortability with this kind of behavior was why a lot of Republicans wanted more information about what Hunter Biden was doing with Joe Biden, in China, in these countries. And now his art is selling to undisclosed donors for, 5 or 6 figures. This is the same gut feeling that something's not right here.
Right.
So, but again, this is rampant in D.C., I suspect.
At least he's not able to leverage U.S. foreign policy and blockade a country in order to get them to up the bid on his artwork. Yeah. But I'm looking forward to what's on your radar next.